If you talk to anybody in gaming, it's getting tougher and tougher. A lot of times the difference of 1% of lifetime value over customer acquisition costs can be the difference between success or failure. We are not necessarily building games for Web3 crypto. We're really using that tech to make Web2 games, mainstream games, stronger and different and differentiated. I think almost every game of ours has over 1 million players. Pudgy's only been out for less than a week, and it'll be probably the fastest game we've ever had to hit 1 million players, which is exciting.
Almost all of your games are quite successful. How did you do that?
As I mentioned, gaming is a lot about leverage, right? How do you kind of have a little bit of leverage over another game? It can't be just great for Web3, but not for Web2. Well, where do Web3 users come from? There are Web2 consumers that become interested in Web3. And I do think, and I still believe to this day, that gaming will drive a majority of first experiences.
All right, guys, welcome back to Uncut Gems, our crypto-native flagship podcast. And today's topic is gaming, Web3 gaming to be precise. As we know, probably many in our audience, Web3 gaming really promised a revolution in the last couple of years. We were talking about player-owned economies, no middleman, true freedom, and all of that stuff, true ownership of in-game assets. But if we are real and check what actually happened, most of these projects, we had like a lot of empty lobbies, broken tokenomics, and almost no titles so far, at least to my knowledge, really have crossed the mainstream chasm as of now. Today's guest might be an exception. We have Mythical Games, led by John Linden, who's joining me today, and they are trying to rewrite this story. They already launched a quite successful roster of games, including Blancos, NFL, and FIFA rivals. And now just recently, Apache Party. We had Luca Netz on the podcast recently. And these games are hitting millions of downloads and somewhat like sneaked blockchain rails into players' pockets, which is very nice. So today we kind of pose this question, can Web3 truly permeate and elevate gaming as we know? We'll find out with John. Welcome, John. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, let's start a little bit high level, how Web3 might be able to fix Web2's flaws in the gaming industry. We know many players face paywalls, a lot of ads. They do not really own their in-game assets. If we think about Counter-Strike or World of Warcraft and all of the issues players had, they're facing like these Web2 walled gardens that we all know of. And now I want to hear from your perspective, what are these major issues in the current gaming industry and how does Mythical align players as true stakeholders and not just like somewhat suckers for ads?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's great. So I think let's maybe start a little bit on the gaming industry in general. It's a huge industry. I mean, we're a big industry already. But there are a lot of challenges. And I think if you talk to anybody in gaming, it's getting tougher and tougher. You're seeing lots of layoffs at major studios. I think there's a couple things happening. One is that there's an enormous amount of players out there that are playing. It's getting very concentrated into certain games, and it's been very difficult for a lot of things. A lot of times the difference of 1% of lifetime value over customer acquisition costs can be the difference between success or failure. And gaming's always been an industry that it has a high failure rate. I think 90% plus of games don't usually make it. So it's always been a tough industry, but when it does break out, it can work really well. So I think what's interesting right now is I think the gaming industry needs a lot of, it needs some leverage, right? It needs things that are kind of giving it an advantage over other games and other monetization. And really what's been interesting is how a lot of games, free to play has been a big piece of this business, games that are literally free to come in and play these games, but you're trying now to kind of chase after people that will monetize. And there's, a lot of times it's a lot of the same people in the same markets, right? So there's a lot of overlooked markets. That's one of the issues in gaming. There's a lot of people chasing the exact same people, which is a challenge, and not necessarily creating net new money into gaming. And then the last one is really the regulatory side from like the app stores has gotten very tough. It's very tough to market these games. There's a lot of, very fairly, there's a lot of privacy type things, but those privacy kind of initiatives have really favored a couple partners that make it hard for other people to break through. So there's a lot of core issues already in gaming that we've been seeing. And this is not new to Mythical, it's not new to Web3. This is just gaming in general. And I think what we're excited about is the concept of Web3 does a couple things. And I'll talk a lot about this during the podcast around kind of from the gaming side, right? Not necessarily from the Web3 side, because that's really how we look at it. We don't look at this as necessarily a new genre. This isn't like a new form of game. It's really a paradigm shift, right? How do we take existing games and have new ways to kind of monetize that, right? And have success. And we are seeing a lot of that right now, which is exciting. Web3 is really adding a new way of really a couple things. One is it's giving power back to the consumers, which we think is powerful. There's not other games, that's one of the reasons we got in the first place, right? Is that, I saw this thing back in 2017, nearly 10 years ago called CryptoKitties. And my behavior as a consumer is I'm not a whale. I don't spend thousands of dollars in games. I'll spend $30, $40 in a game, And next thing I knew, I dropped $600 on 2D images of cats. And I'm like, why did I do that? That's not my normal consumer behavior. And that was actually really intriguing because it really dawned on us back then that was very powerful. That's not buying Spider-Man as entertainment for $1.99 that you're just kind of throwing that money away. It's an asset, right? It's something that I can decide as a consumer. It's not necessarily an investment. I don't like thinking of it as an investment. I like thinking of it as an asset, right? I can make the decision. I have the ability to make that call. I can sell it at a loss. I can sell it at a profit. I can play with it. I can burn it. I can give it to a friend. Whatever I want to do is my choice as a consumer. And I think that's the powerful part. And I think Web3 in general has kind of missed some of that. I think a lot of the Web3 projects out there, it is about profit. It is about financial gain in games. And I don't think that's really, I think we're missing the point. And what we've done in Mythical is kind of the opposite direction. It's really trying to give consumers the ability to be a bigger part, to be entrepreneurial, right? To be a bigger part of that community rather than a financial gain. That's not our pitch. Our pitch is not come into this video game and make money. It's really coming into this game, being able to trade freely and do what you want, right? And I think that's a key difference of what Web3 has to get to ultimately succeed in making this paradigm shift.
Yeah, that's great insight. Also, it resonates somewhat with me. I was also early in some of the games. I played a weird crap game on Avalanche, which got through the roof. I guess one of the major flaws with these early games, including CryptoKitties, was that there was too much focus on the asset part maybe and not enough on the gaming part. Yeah. I also think it's interesting what you mentioned with the app stores. We know they are somewhat monopolies. We know how much Apple takes in, like how high their margins are. Yeah. I know despite that it's all about distribution. You need these app stores as well at the same time. And on the asset side, I feel like there's also what I experienced, this link that I had to some NFTs, for instance, where I felt like, why am I buying this digital picture for, I don't know, $1,000? I had like deep discussions with my girlfriend, but there's something that apparently resonates with us, right? Yeah. On the Mythical front, I mentioned it earlier, you are backed by billions in franchise rights, including FIFA. You secured licenses with the NFL and also FIFA. You build your own chain. You also have a very impressive backing from and a large war chest from A16 or ARK Invest. And I thought it's really interesting how you assembled your team, because as I understand, also a large chunk of the Mythical leadership comes from major AAA IPs like Call of Duty or World of Warcraft, and brings like this traditional expertise to the Web3 space. And I would like to get a better idea on how did this team heritage basically shape your Web3 platform approach?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So yeah, we are very much gaming first by far. In fact, maybe a little too far to some degree, right? I mean, we definitely went very much gaming first. And we we've we've gotten some criticism for that over time, and that's fair. But I think we kind of stuck to our principles of, hey, we are not necessarily building games for Web3 crypto. We're really using that tech to make Web2 games, mainstream games, stronger and different and differentiated, right? And we did get a lot of kind of heat for that early on, of like, well, this isn't really Web3. But I think for us, it's really kind of played out well. It's exactly what we wanted to do, is that now people are realizing maybe it's not about playing to a small crypto audience. It's really about what you can do and how you can change the fun of the games, right? So we've stayed on that track, and we are catching up, I think, on the Web3 side. I think, the tech in general, I mean, even if you look in the last 18 months, the tooling for Web3 applications on any chain has gotten so strong. The ability now to have a better experience is definitely getting there. And that's something that it took a long time. I mean, back in 2017, you'd send Ethereum breath and hope it showed up on the other side, right? And honestly, even a few years ago, it's still like that. Now it's gotten a lot better. It's much faster. It's instant responses. There's a lot of great things that are happening now. They kind of ease that consumer side. So again, we've stayed very focused on the gaming side. We've seen that in our games. We have games now. I think almost every game of ours has over 1 million players. Pudgy's only been out for less than a week, and it'll be probably the fastest game we've ever had to hit 1 million players, which is exciting. I think the previous fastest game we had was 2 months ago with FIFA. FIFA got to 1 million players in about 6 weeks. I think Pudgy's going to get there even faster, right? I think Pudgy will be there in less than a month, which is exciting. So we're starting to see players on board. I think we're also starting to see one of the things that's really, really interesting. Now, it is early, but Pudgy, as an example, Pudgy Party already is sitting at a 4.9 star rating in the App Store, right? That's amazing. That's a great thing. And I think that's one of our proudest achievements, as we had this game, NFL Rivals, and we brought out a game against a company that's been in the space for 37 years. Madden from EA has been out for 37 years. It's a household name in the United States, right? And the idea of coming out with a new game that had a very different economy was a little terrifying. It's like, are people going to like this? And what I think is amazing is we're sitting at a higher rating than Madden is, in the App Store. And that's after like 250,000 reviews. Like, it's 250,000 user submitted reviews, and we're sitting at a higher rating than the previous game. So I think those are good signs, right? Those are great signs that you can bring out new economies with big IPs that have been around for a long time and actually give a good experience to the consumers.
I guess a really nice chemistry when it comes to Pudgy is the fact that you get both the more crypto native people, because it's like it emerged from crypto, this IP, but you also get this like more retailish fan base. When you think about all of these Instagram followers, they all resonate with this cute IP. So it was a very good play from the Mythical side to kind of launch this game alongside Igloo. Maybe the obvious follow-up question would be like, how do you select these IPs? What makes a brand or IP a compelling story for collaboration with Mythical? How do you exactly evaluate a fit? Because if I look at your roster, there's only strong, and almost all of your games are quite successful. So how did you do that?
Yeah, I think for us, I've had a lot of experience in IPs, which is great, kind of new IPs, from my Call of Duty days to my last company, Seismic. We worked with amazing IPs. We worked with Star Wars, we worked with Marvel, we worked with Magic the Gathering. We had some really, really strong IPs. So I think there is a skill to kind of working with IPs, but IPs can also bring a lot of it helps with the marketing side quite a bit, right? There's a lot of lore there. There's a lot of fan base already there. It can definitely edge. As I mentioned, gaming is a lot about leverage, right? How do you kind of have a little bit of leverage over another game? And I think that's an important one. It's not the only thing though. And I think this is also still where Web3 has to evolve a little bit. Is, I saw a tweet yesterday on X that was basically, I thought it was a great point. I can't remember who posted it, but it was basically, they were kind of comparing other Web3 games to the category, right? And I think that's an important thing. It's not about a great Web3 game. It has to be great in its own category, right? So if you put out an FPS game, a first-person shooter, it has to be great on its own, right? Otherwise it won't scale, right? It can't be just great for Web3, but not for Web2. And I do think what's interesting about Pudgy is, you pick a genre, right? So when we started talking to Luca and team, we loved what they were doing. I think it's one of the few brands in Web3 that really has the potential to be a major worldwide hit, right? It has like Labubu type status, I think, of what it can do, right? And they've done a great job of marketing. The other thing I absolutely love about Pudgy is they are so current. And that's even rare for existing brands, right? This team knows how to take what's really happening in the moment. And I think that's an important part too, is, the in the world we live in these days, young adults, kids, even grown-ups, right? The interest and the zeitgeist moves fast, right? And you have to be able to kind of quickly reflect that. And I think Pudgy's great at that. So I think what you're going to see, we've kind of leaned into this whole concept of what's being called, Italian brain rot or brain rot. And honestly, at first I didn't get it. I'm like, I don't get this. What are these IPs? What are these things out there? And the more I got into it, the more you start doing market research, you're like, wow, this is actually right now taking the world by storm. Like, kids are playing, there's billions and billions of impressions on these characters that most of the world still hasn't heard about. And I think that's amazing. And that's what Pudgy's really good at, is being able to take these adorable IP of the penguins and be able to put them into anything, right? We can literally bring any IP into this game and it'll work with the Pudgy community and with the Pudgy characters. So that's what I love about Pudgy. But I think it's really important. Again, we're playing in the party genre. There have been other games in the party genre. We didn't create the genre, just like almost 99% of games don't create the genre anymore. They basically find the game that makes sense and then play mechanics that make sense. And then you try and make it the best for your IP. And that's what we've kind of done. We've taken Pudgy, we've taken what that community embraces. And I think we built a party game that is very fun and very cool to see. And I think that's why we're seeing the success on it, is that I think we're best in that party game genre. I think if you take all the other party game genres out there, we're not only just great for Web3, I think we've delivered the next generation game for Web2. And I think that's the important part, is you have to have both. If you don't have both, you'll succeed for a while on the Web3 side, but the Web2 won't catch up, right? And it can only take you so far, I'm not saying that the Web3 games that don't go after Web2 won't be successful, but I don't think they're ever going to break through unless you can capture both sides of that. And I think Pudgy is the one that's doing that right now for sure.
Yeah. Also, obviously, on the Web2 side, you still have the larger user base that you want to tackle, of course.
Absolutely.
What was also interesting in terms of the Pudgy distribution strategy is how they also tap into different ecosystems. When you think about where is the NFT collection residing on Ethereum, where is the Pengu token residing on Solana, where is Pudgy Party now living, kind of on Mythical Games, which is in the Polkadot ecosystem. In my view, this is like just a very interesting strategy to basically get more users across the Web3 space, and at the same time tackle the Web2 space via the IP itself.
And it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of like saying, hey, I'm going to build a video game, but it's only for Visa card holders, right? Or this game is only for MasterCard holders, or I'm going to build one that's just for American Express users, right? That's not how it works anymore, right? It has to be seamless. And I agree completely. I think that's what Pudgy's done very well, is they put the right assets on the right chain. Now the key, honestly, Dominic, is to make sure it all plays nice, right? And I think Web3 is getting there. I think the EVM side is definitely starting to be very compatible. I think we're starting to see a lot more cross-chain, but for us, we want to support what they're doing on Abstract. We want to support what they're doing in Solana. We want to support what they're doing in mainnet Ethereum. And I think that's going to be the key, is making sure all of them play nice, because again, you don't want to be building a video game just for one credit card type, you want to build a game for everybody,
I guess, in that regard, maximalism makes no sense at all. You want to be generic and agnostic to your user base in the best case. What I'm wondering, I fully agree as well on the fact that I guess a couple of years back, it probably wasn't even possible to launch a successful Web3 game because you had like a lot of infrastructure bottlenecks, you had a lot of UX issues. I'm wondering, like, is there data on your users basically where you can derive like how many people are joining that do not have any Web3 experience, that never held a wallet, that never operated like with on-chain, for instance? I'm curious.
That's a great question. I think the way we look at that probably is how much of our money is spent in the marketplace via fiat rails versus crypto rails, right?
Yeah, good.
And it's
Good
it's
proxy.
like 88% is fiat. So 88% of our transaction volume happens from fiat, right? And for fiat, that's two categories for us. That's, things like credit card or bank, but it's also in-game, So 88% of the revenue comes from that, but it's automatically converted into into essentially crypto behind the scenes, right? In a very regulated way. So we're able to that, and that's one of the secrets that we've been able to do is we can take payments from really anything very seamlessly and really have it transparent behind the scenes. But I would say right now, I mean, my ultimate, we don't have exact data, but my guess is roughly the same. 88% of our players so far have had no crypto experience, right? Now, Pudgy's a little bit different. Pudgy obviously has a lot higher crypto experience right now, but as it grows over the next 12 months or 18 months, I think it's gonna end up being about the same, maybe a little bit lower, but it'll be 80+% will be new to crypto. And I think that's an opportunity, right? I think that's an enormous, because like I've had a lot of groups say, well, those aren't Web3 users, right? Well, where do Web3 users come from? I mean, they're Web2 consumers that become interested in Web3. And I do think, and I still believe to this day, that gaming will drive a majority of first experiences. It's over half the world's population, right? And they get it. And if you make it seamless, you don't need to be in their face. You need to be like, cool, I got this item. And oh, wait, somebody is wanting to buy this from me. What does that mean? Oh, I can actually trade this with somebody else around the world. And then they kind of start figuring it out, like, oh, I get it now, right? And I think that's important, and we're adding a lot of people, right? Now, a lot of them are not crypto native people, but I think they're going to become that, and they start off with just playing, and then they start off with receiving assets, and then they start off trading. And then I think eventually you have them in the ecosystem. They're like, oh, I have these tokens and I can do this with these tokens and it's my decision as a consumer, right? So it's really kind of a gradual onboard into the ecosystem. And if we can do that with 100 million people, you start really shifting the numbers of the crypto market.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it in my view, especially like maybe you could like see maybe the first way of like organic adoption was the speculative side in crypto overall. Like it was basically how many people bought Bitcoin or ETH or other tokens because they were deemed an investment. They had like great upside. So kind of this speculative part was maybe the first major adoption kind of vertical. The second one might be like stable coins where people now have access to dollars in jurisdictions that suffer from like very heavy monetary debasement. And maybe the third pillar now is gaming, where you have this very elegant organic way of onboarding users. I'm wondering, like, is there some incentive mechanism built into Mythical Games where maybe users even have an incentive to truly become an on-chain citizen, on-chain gamer?
I mean, they are on chain at the beginning. I mean, I think the way I view it is this, right? Is that I personally think I'm a big Bitcoin Ethereum fan, right? Like I have holdings, I have wallets, I have ledgers, things like that I'm holding that asset directly. Okay. Now, if you came in and bought through Robinhood, are you less of a Bitcoin holder than I am? If you bought Bitcoin on Robinhood, you're not holding that in your own wallet, right? You're not holding that. Are you a Bitcoin holder too? Yes, you are, right? So to me, I don't think there's a big difference overall. I think if my mom came in and said, hey, look, I bought $500 of Bitcoin on Robinhood, that's still a Bitcoin holder, right? Whether she's holding it directly and knows all the ins and outs of the principles or not, she's still part of the ecosystem at that point. And I view the same thing in gaming, right? Is you want them in the market. You want them, it is on chain. It is their own chain, right? or their own wallet. They have their own wallet they're holding these assets in. So they are part of the community. Are they the next big DeFi trader? Probably not. Just like my mom's probably not going to be, shorting Bitcoin or buying futures on Bitcoin, right? But she's still part of the ecosystem and an important part, right? So I view gaming kind of like that. It's almost like if you go and buy crypto through an ETF or you buy it through Robinhood, you're abstracted away from actually holding it yourself, but that's okay. And I think that's the same thing with gaming. And what you will see, and I think we will probably see this with Robinhood and all that too, is they'll start moving numbers for the ecosystem in a big, big, powerful way. But there will be people that'll be like, you know what? I want to go deeper into this rabbit hole, right? I want to understand this further. You'll see the same thing in gaming. You're not going to see everybody, but you'll see some of them that do become DeFi traders. You'll see them that do start trading across ecosystems just as they start understanding it more.
I think that's a very nice angle or a nice way to put it, because I feel, at least to me, it's somewhat important, or I like seeing that people get stimulated in order to educate themselves a little bit more in terms of what they are actually dealing with, because it's such a I guess we share the same view. It's such a breakthrough technology. It might disrupt a lot of areas in the years to come. So it's definitely worth knowing what is happening under the hood. But obviously, not everybody understands how an iPhone works. So it's not a necessity.
And the way I view it too is that there's a lot of consumers out there that'll go swipe their card at Starbucks. They don't understand how the payment processing systems work behind the scenes, and they don't really need to, right? At the end of the day, they got what they needed, right? I have this method. I transacted. I got what I needed. I'm a happy consumer, right? That's okay. You don't need to understand about the routing networks of the Visa network, Visa layer, the Visa network, right? You just don't need to know that. And I think that's the same thing for a majority of consumers. Not everybody will ever become, big degen or degen DeFi traders, and that's okay, but you want them in the ecosystem. You want everyone trading on the principles of blockchain, right? And that I think is important overall.
I think that segues nice in the next topic that I would like to touch, because as we outlined earlier, like gamers, basically the highest kind of demand is that they want to experience a nice game. They want to have a lot of pleasure, maybe like experience a better game than they could with Web2, for instance. And we know in the early Web3 gaming days, there was a lot of like stuff around tokenomics that didn't pan out, poor gameplay, infrastructure was a problem. And you said earlier that from the Mythical perspective, you view that gaming first and then blockchain, or this blockchain experience second. And I would like to know, like, do you think that the future of Web3 gaming lies more in this cultural resonance than the speculative part? And how does Mythical's operating model like lean into that thesis of like gaming first, blockchain second?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think a couple things. One is that I'm gonna shift it just a little bit on what we've seen work in a big way, and I think this is really, really powerful. So we came out with, and I'll use NFL as an example. So we just entered our third season, year 3 of NFL. So we started in 23. Last year, 24 was year 2. We just started. In fact, tonight is NFL kickoff. So it's a big moment. Kind of the zeitgeist starts climbing in the United States, which is great. In particular, other countries as well, but particularly in the United States. And I think what's really interesting about that is that, in year 1, we added the ability to buy and sell, right? Cool. You have these assets. I can now buy and sell Patrick Mahomes. I can buy and sell Lamar Jackson. I can buy and sell these items in the game. And what did that do for the game? Well, we started to see a lift. We started seeing about 20% of the revenue now came from trading, right? 80% came from traditional Web2 methods. 20% came from gaming. Year 2, we added 2 additional things. We added the ability now to trade in the game itself. That's a big, big moment, right? We are fully approved with Apple and Google to actually trade where the people are playing. That's huge. And it took a lot of work to kind of translate between that, right? Where you're not trading directly in crypto, you're trading in a virtual currency that is reflected in the token. So basically, I'm buying assets like I would in a normal game. I'm transacting through a regulated partner to convert that fiat into Myth token, as an example, and then I'm able to execute that immediately on chain, right? So I can do that directly in the game now. So that was one big innovation we did in year one or year two. The second one we did is we added a thing called quick trade. So quick trade was probably the biggest innovation we had. So quick trade now says, hey, so here's the way I view it, Dominic, is that even in gaming, right? The amount of people that will pay, let's say a Patrick Mahomes, my favorite player in the NFL, my hometown hero here. Let's say he's going now for $200 in the secondary market. Mythical's not setting that price. That is a price set by the open market, right? $200. There's very few consumers in the world that are still going to put $200 on a credit card to buy a digital asset. There are some. There's just not as many as there's just not a ton of them, right? And then so we added, okay, you could buy it on a credit card, you could buy it in crypto, and there's I think even fewer people around the world that would have $200 of crypto. If you look at the world's population, $200 of crypto to buy a digital asset, right? But what we do know in gaming is people will trade. So what we did, and this was probably the biggest innovation Mythical's ever had, honestly, is we added this thing called quick trade. So when Patrick Mahomes pops up, it says it's going for $200, and I'm like, I want that. I can buy it with $200 on my credit card, which a lot of people won't. I could buy it with $200 of crypto, which a lot of people won't, or I could trade for it. And what happens when I say I want to trade for it? It's a traditional trading screen, right? Cool, $200 of value here. All of my digital assets now show up on the other side. Everything I own as a consumer shows up on the other side. And they're all priced by the order book in real time. And as an example with NFL Rivals, we have probably 50,000 open bids for items at any given second, right? We have a pretty healthy order book. And I think as we start connecting ecosystems together, that order book gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So right now, basically what happens is all my items show up and they're all being priced. And I can be like, you know what? I don't want these 5 items anymore. And I start checking them and it's like, oh, $200, $200. And at that point I can say trade. And when I say trade, I got what I wanted and I got rid of what I didn't want, right? I didn't pay anything as a consumer. It's a cashless transaction. I got what I wanted. I got rid of the items I didn't want. What actually happened behind the scenes, and this is the power of Web3, is we had a global economy behind the scenes that we real-time bought Mahomes from one seller around the world, and we real-time sold those 5 assets to potentially 5 different buyers around the world, all in a matter of seconds. So literally we had a 6-party transaction connected, a 6-legged trade that all happened in real time. And to me, that's the power, Dominic, of where this goes. So what does that do for games, right? One, we just made money on a trade because there's transaction fees on each leg of that trade. We just made money on a consumer that didn't spend anything in the game. That's really powerful, right? The second one is that basically we had this worldwide that player might have come from Argentina, right? Argentina doesn't spend a lot of money in video games, right? It's very hard to get money out of Argentinian players, right? As an example, and you can name off countries, right? But we just made money from a player in a country it's hard to monetize. So from a gaming perspective, we've figured out a way to monetize in markets that don't usually monetize because they're using their time and their skill to play this worldwide game, right? That becomes enormous, right? So from a gaming perspective, this is inevitable. This will happen in a very large scale because now there are so many players in Southeast Asia. There's so many players in India, in Africa, in South America that are very hard to monetize through traditional routes, but they will play and they will play. And they can be the connective tissue to connect buyers and sellers around the world. They become much more valuable to game developers than they are now. That's the important thing that's happening. We're monetizing players in a different way, and markets now around the world become more valuable than they have been in the past. And that's also super important.
Valuable and accessible, I guess.
And accessible.
Maybe the only downside that I see from the quick trade feature, although it's very cool, I agree, is maybe that you have to sell your assets into bits, maybe like an option to collateralize
That's actually, yeah. And
Is that
I think
coming?
where you're going with that is where the future is, right? That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And you're right. It's not a perfect system, but what you do find is if there's traders, and it's kind of interesting to where in gaming right now, what's happening, you might have traders and all they do is specialize in trading, right? They're trying to maximize their P&L, and that's awesome. That's a cohort of players. It's not the majority of players. The majority of players are just playing the game. But the players are a little less sensitive to pricing. They're like, I really want this and I'm willing to give up this and I don't really care what the price is as long as I get this, right? So it starts creating these multiple different sets of cohorts around the world, and Web3 is that connective tissue, right? That is the power of Web3. It's not about a tokenomics to where I can earn a little bit of money every single time I'm part of that transaction. It's really about connecting multiple economies and multiple sets of cohorts around the world.
Also, it allows you to source liquidity if you don't have it to buy that one card like way quicker or way in a more way in a more rapid fashion that traditionally possible. This is also the case if you think about it. I mean, a cool vision for the future is somewhat that you tokenize your entire portfolio, or everything is in your wallet kind of, and you can collateralize a lot of things. You can
Absolutely.
just sell like 30-year bonds immediately and just swap it into whatever in-game asset, for instance. So this is a future that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think you're exactly right. This is exactly where this starts going. And I think the key to this, though, is you need a few 100 million people that are already kind of in this, that are building up these assets. But there's multiple different types of products you can build in the future. And frankly, if you can cut the consumer in on it, right? Which again is the power of Web3. I love a lot of initiatives around privacy focused, consumer focused. It's the step one still is get the connective pipeline going, get the consumer in the ecosystem, and there'll be 15, 20 different products that you can build on top of that. I think you're exactly right of where that goes for sure.
Yeah, and then it's probably, liquidity attracts liquidity and so forth, and then you have this self-reinforcing loop. But let's see, still music of the future. I think like on the trading part in your marketplaces, it's very impressive how that you did embed the marketplaces into the game. I think it even unlocks even more engagement for sure than before, and therefore revenue. And I want to stick a little bit with the revenue angle, because like being somebody that is like in the ecosystem or in the industry for a couple of years now, I feel like the industry is more and more starving for value and growth investments. Yeah. We like a lot of investors in the crypto space, they want sound fundamentals. They want to see something that might be a little bit more equity-like, There's also this major deregulation happening in the US with like Atkins even now saying, hey, maybe there's a path to crypto securities where maybe tokens become the better shares at some point. And at the same time, we know crypto really unlocks the most efficient business models ever, right? If you think about hyperliquid and so forth. I'm wondering, maybe you could like help us understand like a little bit more around the Myth token. How does Mythical like plan to accrue token value, maybe beyond speculation? Is there something cooking? Is there something in place? Because in my view, it's something that will become more and more important as we blend into this like more traditional financial world.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think this is an area we haven't done as well as a company, and we're very much focused on this now. We wanted to really, I think this is one area I probably made a mistake in the Web3 space for early on, is that I made the assumption of like crypto prices would follow fundamental value, right? And I still believe it eventually will, right? But it hasn't, it's its own game, right? The token is its own product. And I think what we set up in Mythical early on with Myth, and what we did earlier this year, I thought was really, 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 really great, right? The idea that here's what happens in our ecosystem, right? Consumers are buying the token for utility, right? At the end of the day, honestly, they don't care if the token's 10 cents or $10. They just don't. They're buying $100 equivalent so they can go get their favorite player, so they can open another pack, so they can get an attachment to a pudgy costume, right? That's really what consumers are doing. So that's really interesting. First of all, is you have the utility is kind of not it's price agnostic. They don't care. They're just going to keep buying, right? They also don't care about bull or bear markets because of that. Consumers don't really care about bull or bear markets in gaming because they just keep buying. They just keep buying stuff, right? Because they're in their heads, they're buying for utility. So that's step one. Step two, that's also interesting, is consumers don't really sell, right? It's not a DeFi crypto crowd. They're not trying to maximize that next 1%. They just are buying this token and they're holding it. You know, it's almost a store of value for them, and they're spending it back in the market over and over and over, right? Now, some of them take it out. I think we've seen so far in the history of Mythical, about 24% has ever come out of the marketplace. So 76% of the value has stayed in the ecosystem. So what happens to that in the ecosystem? Well, they just keep spending, and as they spend, it generates gas fees, and those gas fees are being burned, right? So you have an audience now that is basically buying regardless of price. They don't sell, or a majority of them don't ever sell that token, but they just are generating more transactions that are burning that token. So supply is getting more and more and more rare, right? I think we burned 7 or 8 million tokens, I believe, at this point. So we've burned we're closing in on at least 1% of total supply already has been burned, never coming back, right? So you suddenly have a token now that is getting used every single game that you add, every single player, every single feature you add is creating more deflation on that supply, while you have an audience that's going to buy it regardless of price, right? So you're buying regardless of price, you have deflation against the supply. We think it's a really interesting tokenomics, right? So I think though there's improvements we can do. We've seen a lot already, but I think what you're seeing is we have an amazing long-term economic model on how this goes. More games, more deflation, more pressure on the buy side of that token because there's fewer tokens out there. So I think long term, I think we've nailed the tokenomics. I think what we're working on now is what is the shorter or midterm economics, right? Because again, if every institutional buyer was just looking at what's the long-term value of a token, I think we'd be number 1 out there or number 10 out there. You know, we'd be in the top 10. What we're also trying to balance is token funds and things like that are more short or midterm focused, and we're working to do better on that side. So we are generating a lot of fees. We're thinking about things like buybacks, right? We're thinking about things like treasury protocol fees, right? And I think those are really, really exciting opportunities. And you nailed it before. We've been pretty limited on what we can do around those because of US regulatory laws, things like that. But as that landscape shifts, you're going to have more and more stuff we can do. I love the idea of having, value of the direct consumer end up going out to token holders, right? I think that's interesting. I think that's fascinating. We just got to make sure we do it in a very regulated way. And I think those laws are changing as we speak, right? Which gives more and more power into what can happen behind short or midterm economics. So I believe that Myth has an amazing long-term tokenomics. And I think because of the shifts and changes right now, I think we'll be able to do a lot more soon on that short or midterm range. Now, one thing we haven't really played into, we're not playing the hype speculation game. We haven't really played that. I don't think that's the right thing to do. But I think the biggest challenge we've had is a liquidity play, right? It's hard to buy the token. And we are working very actively. In fact, we have a brand new head of Web3 that has joined us, a guy named Duncan who's joined us. That's all he's thinking about now. How do we get more liquidity in the token? How do we get more exchanges to list that token? How do we do more around staking mechanisms and things like that that benefit short and midterm? Because the long-term economics, I think we've nailed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It also sounds, at least the deflationary angle, it's I guess it's a sound flywheel effect. I do like the idea of having buybacks if you have a revenue-heavy engine running. Like, why not? Especially since I'm of the view that usually most of these foundations or protocols hold a large amount of their own token. So why not drive value to the token and benefit yourself to some degree, Yeah.
I agree, and I think, like I said, we have a lot of long-term holders. I'm a long-term holder. My investors are long-term holders, and I think there's ways that if with the changing kind of angles of what's happening out there, I want to reward long-term holders in a short-term way, right? And I think there's going to be more things we can do there. I think the industry's kind of moved to this buyback method, which I still don't think I personally don't think it's amazing because you can kind of manipulate it a little bit, really, if you think about buybacks. What I love is treasury protocol fees. I think that's really fascinating to where it's like, hey, especially if you had a treasury protocol fee that paid out every 6 hours, it's like, well, if you're not in the token this 6 hours and something amazing happens in FIFA, you missed out, and I think that's fascinating. Now, I still think there's some work to be done there, but I think those are things that we're watching for, and we're working to figure out how do we think about stuff like that, because it is kind of fun in gaming, right? It's fun in entertainment. Imagine if you're holding a movie studio and suddenly, the movie does really, really great, and you have instant feedback on, right, that instant payment because you were there when that happened. I think that's interesting. I think that's the reason of why you're securing the network. That's why you want to be part of those protocols, is for those moments, right? So I think that's really interesting. It's something we're definitely looking at. And I'd say you'll probably hear something from us very soon in terms of how we're thinking about that space, in terms of like, how do we pair kind of a protocol treasury that's automatic? And I think that's a really important thing. I think it has to be automatic, really, at the end of the day. It needs to be built in at the protocol level, not at just a company decides when and how they want to buy back that token. That's doable. I mean, it's been done in the equity market for
Exactly.
50 years, right? In terms of
Yes.
buybacks and things like that. So we'll consider something like that as well. But what I really want to do is I want to have something that everyone that's in the ecosystem, that's being part and securing that network and part of that process, gets to win when it wins, and I think that's the
Yes.
exciting part to me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something we're very much looking at to kind of complement the long-term tokenomics that I think is already really awesome.
Yeah. I love the idea of the treasury fees. I have to look into that a little bit deeper. But I'm like looking forward to see what you might announce at some point down the line. Maybe a little bit more crypto native, a little bit more tech heavy. I would like to highlight your tech stack choices, or discuss like briefly. You build a unified system of SDKs, your REST APIs, and we talked about the marketplace. We know that gaming, we touched it earlier, has very large throughput demands, right, or needs, and many teams before struggled with that. We also, a lot of teams struggled with the UX features and so forth. I'm wondering, like, what was the major reason why you select the Polkadot ecosystem and not another ecosystem, given that, for instance, Ethereum or Solana or a couple others might come with a stronger user base and a better user retention? So maybe guide us through your mental model on what led to that kind of design decision on choosing Polkadot as a tech stack.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I said, it's we've been in the space for a while. This is actually, we've had a couple different permutations of this in the past, and we've had to kind of adapt based on what we're looking for. I think where we kind of came about, a couple of years ago when we made this decision was we were looking at the tech at the time. Now, I do think that there's some other ecosystems definitely doing some great work, right? I think Polkadot was one of the early, obviously, kind of concepts of this pair chain type mentality, and I think it's interesting. But Polkadot's now going back a little bit, so they kind of went heavy in parachains, and now they're kind of balancing that out with kind of mainnet as well. I think other groups have been very heavy on mainnet. Now they're trying to kind of figure out their own parachain strategy, things like Avalanche and Arbitrum and things like that. But I do think for us it was really a couple things. One, we were able to kind of build the chain we want. Effectively, we have our own L1, right? We have our own gas token. Everything's settled in our token, which we were very needed. The biggest thing though is it hasn't gone down. In fact, I'm not even sure Polkadot's. I don't want to kind of knock on wood here. I'm not sure Polkadot's ever really gone down, and I think that's important. And I do think if you look at some of the ones you mentioned, there have been times that it goes down, right? And that puts challenges for us on things like Apple, right? Apple and Google, they have requirements that if you take money from a consumer, you have to deliver. And if that chain, that mainnet goes down, or it's down for days or whatever, that's a problem. And that actually has happened with some other groups, right? So I think stability was a big one. They can handle the volume. We haven't had any problems with the volume, things like that. And the ability that we have our own ecosystem there. What I will say is we're definitely focused on expanding that ecosystem, right? Like for us, it is shifting from, we now have things like Pudgy, right? Which is on the Pingu token. As you mentioned before, Pudgies are on mainnet, Pingu is on Solana and Abstract. You're starting to see communities. And I think our focus is very much making sure we can connect everybody together. So you'll see a lot of our kind of, blockchain decisions on how we're trying to implement tech is going to be really built around that. Is how do we make every ecosystem kind of accessible? And that's kind of the direction we're heading right now.
Okay, that's nice. Because I guess one major issue in crypto is still like the whole topic of fragmentation and interoperability. I know there's also a lot of initiatives and so forth to try to solve that, but we are in now for like more than a decade, and it's still somewhat a struggle for many.
Yeah, so I think for us, our token is ERC20 token that is then bridged into Substrate, right? So the way it's set up, right now our token actually lives on mainnet Ethereum. It also has a pool of tokens on Avalanche. It has a pool of tokens on Base, and then obviously a big pool of tokens in Substrate. So we already have our token is technically on 4 different chains already. And the idea behind that, like I said, I think you'll probably see Myth on Solana at some point. You'll see Myth on Arbitrum, right? You'll see it on different chains, because really we want to start using that token as a connective tissue, right? So we don't really care where that token's at. At the end of the day, if we're collecting some Myth in Solana Myth and some in Base Myth and some in Substrate Myth, at the end of the day, it's still all Myth, right? And you can the tech to rebridge those is pretty easy. So I think that's the way we're starting to think about things in terms of, what's the right tech to record everything, right? But it really does have to be interoperable. And I think interoperability can be a lot of different things. I think you're starting to see a lot of interoperability. Bridges are getting instant or within minutes now, which is awesome. NFT bridging is not quite there. We've had a lot of discussions with people like OpenSea and groups like that on how do we really start making this a little bit more interoperable between what we're doing and what they're doing. So I think to me, at the end of the day, it's about access to the token. It's about access to the order book. I think those are the things we're doing, because what we're good at doing is driving consumers into this experience. And from the chain side, we want to make sure, 1, it's stable, 2, it doesn't go down or have any issues, right? And then 3, we have the ability to connect any ecosystem that really wants to be part of this. And I think that's what we're trying to work through on how we build that out.
Nice, love the idea. As we inch closer to the end of our nice, fruitful discussion so far, we have this thing that we call like rapid fire questions. Okay. So I have like 4 questions, and you try to answer in a brief, catchy, sharp fashion.
Let's do it.
All right, let's go. What's a dream IP you haven't worked with yet?
Oh man, I've worked with a lot. Dream IP, for a long time I wanted to work with like The Simpsons or Rick and Morty. There's a bunch of them out there. Yep. There's a ton of them out there right now that I'd love to. But actually, the one right now I'd love to talk about is Pumpmart and Labubu. I think that's a really fascinating IP that's taking the world by storm. So I'd say that's probably my number 1 right now.
Good one. Then, do you think that Web3 games, if that's a thing even, at some point in the future will rival the traditional giants such as Fortnite, GTA, or Roblox? Or do you think that they will join the Web3 party at some point?
So that's a great question. I think the big walled gardens will stay walled for as long as they can, right? Because it's in their advantage to take advantage of that leverage. I think what you'll see is you'll start seeing new non-walled gardens emerge that start taking over the walled gardens over time. So I think it won't come necessarily from the Activisions or Roblox right now or Fortnite's right now, but I think you'll see other ones that will eventually rival them for sure.
Okay, good answer. What is one Web3 misconception about gaming that you'd like to get rid of? Maybe
it's
like
it's not about a single game token. I'm not a big fan of single game tokens. I love ecosystem tokens. I think you're buying into an ecosystem. You're not buying into a single game. Yeah, it's like even Call of Duty or World of Warcraft. It's all supply and demand, right? And even games that have a long period of time will have shifts in that supply and demand. So I think it really needs to be about an ecosystem rather than a single game token.
And then maybe building on your like vast experience in traditional gaming, how do you think will AI in the years to come like change gaming? Maybe even like things like you have a game that is rendered in real time from an AI engine and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think AI is going to obviously permeate everything. We're already using it for a lot of things, but I think everything from asset generation to letting players, submit their own worlds into games and have kind of an AI master that's checking them in and kind of fitting them into that universe. I think it's going to be very, very big. I do think you'll see a Roblox style that's completely AI driven at some point for sure. And I think in the shorter term, I think you're seeing a lot of groups now lean into AI to expand creation within worlds that are non-AI. I think you will see AI built worlds from the beginning that just naturally accept that. So I can submit content, I can submit anything I want, and it'll shift that world in a big way. So yeah, I think I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago. To be honest, I would have said, hey, there's always, and I still fundamentally believe there'll always be humans kind of driving the concepts because games are art, at the end of the day. But AI is going to be a major force multiplier. It's going to be a cost reduction multiplier, which I think is going to be important for games.
Yeah, I fully agree on that part. And it's also like basically it resembles my experience that I have from interactions with AI. I feel that the true creative force is always the human being, at least at this point in time. Let's see if this changes as well. I'm not sure. All right. Hey, I had a lot of fun chatting with you. It was really a lot of pleasure for me, and I hopefully for the audience as well. So therefore, big thanks to you and Mythical Games for walking us through your ecosystem, like the whole IP topics, your design choices in terms of tech stack and so forth. And the tokenomics part, I'm excited that you are like that you think it's an important angle to look at, because I have the same view. For our listeners, check the show notes for links to Mythical's platform docs and their website and so forth. Subscribe, rate, review, and John, again, it was a pleasure to have you on the show today. All right, take care.